Hello and welcome everyone to our webinar this Monday. I'm here in Atlanta, Georgia at the Miller Award Alumni House, and I'm joined by Tracy Scott, our Department of Sociology guest faculty member today. We're really excited to have you joining us. This is a very busy week for Emory. I just learned from Dr. Scott that meetings are already attending, students are rolling in, so the big start is Wednesday, and we're really close to that. So thank you all for joining us. Like I said, we are here at the Miller Award Alumni House. This is part of our digital platform programming to bring faculty and career and professional development experts to the alumni community. So Dr. Scott is representing the Department of Sociology to bring you a little insight into her research, what she's teaching right now, and the impact that she is working on with Emory. This is a live webinar, so we're encouraging everyone to submit questions in the question docket of your GoToWebinar dashboard. So anytime you have a question, if you want to know more about something, if you need any clarification, please type that into the question box and I'll be facilitating those questions. And at the end of the presentation, Dr. Scott will be answering questions. So feel free to submit those questions in real time and we'll get those answered. And thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Scott, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Hello. I'm sorry, my email was still on, so I had to just turn that off.
No problem.
All right. Am I on now? Yes.
Yep, you're great.
All right. I'm Tracy Scott. I am in the sociology department at Emory, and I've did my PhD work at Princeton. I've been in Emory sociology since 2004, and I won't tell you much more about my background because I'm going to talk about that in the presentation. So what I want to do, you'll see me a little bit during this webinar, and you'll see my slides as well. So as you see here, I'm going to put the slides up for a bit, and then I'll come back and show you myself as well. I've titled this How Culture Influences Life Decisions, and we're looking at work life. And I want to give you an outline of where we're going today. I want to give you a little introduction where I'm going to give you some definitions of the terms I'm going to use so that you understand what I'm talking about. And then I'm going to move into my career story. I'm going to use my own story as a way into some of these concepts and some of the research that I'm going to talk about. So we'll move into that, questioning conventions and my story. Then I'm going to give you a little bit of evidence from my own research about how culture matters for work life. And then at the end, we'll wrap up with a little bit of a challenge to all of you to think about your own contexts and culture and your own choices. So let me move into this introduction. What I want to tell you a little bit about, I have no idea what your backgrounds are, so I want to help you understand what sociology is in case you don't know. This is my framework that I'm using today. And I like to talk about sociology in terms of how different realms of life affect human behavior. When we look at the different disciplines at college, you will, in the humanities. And oftentimes we look at genetics and biology and how that affects human behavior. We also look at the brain and mental processes, like psychology looks at the psyche and other things internal to the individual. And then what sociology does is actually look at all those things that are external to the individual, mainly social life. So our social groups, our social interactions, all of those things in our environment that actually have quite a large influence on us, but oftentimes people aren't as aware of these social factors because they're not as easy to see. So I'm going to talk about social context a lot today. And again, I've given you a definition here. Don't worry too much about this. I just want you to kind of understand where I'm coming from. And how we define social context is this external reality that's formed by our interactions between individuals. So it's this social environment, social systems, all that kind of stuff. I'm going to give you a slide in a minute that will help you visually with this a bit more. But our social context can be anything from our families to the country that we live in. And we have lots of these contexts that we're embedded in at the same time. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But what I want you to understand next is what culture is. And basically what we say is every social context has kind of two big parts, social structure and culture. So social structure is the way that that context is actually structured, the way that the relationships between people in the group are structured. And then the culture is what basically those relationships mean. It's the meaning behind the group and the group's kind of values and conventions and worldview. As an example of this, I like to use an organization, a work organization. So think about the workplace that you are in now, and all work organizations have an organizational chart. Think about kind of the organizational chart. That's the structure of the workplace. The culture is harder to see because it's more informal, oftentimes implicit, but it's the sort of thing where you and your coworkers have shared in-jokes, or you have values that your work group has in terms of how you want to structure your workday, or what are important things about the work mission. That's the culture. So again, what I want to show you is that all of us are embedded in multiple contexts at the same time. And I've just kind of done this little visual graphic to give you an idea of what this looks like. Obviously, this is not, not reality, but imagine a young adult who is part of all these different groups. You've got your workplace, you have your family, you have your community of origin, you have the city or town you live in. You may have a religious group that you're part of, or some other kind of social group, a sports team or a club, and then the country that is kind of all of these smaller groups are part of. All of these contexts have both the structure and the culture, and it's different. Each one of them, the structure and culture, are specific to that particular context. So I hope this makes a little bit of sense, but this will be the background for how I talk about culture affecting work life.
Tracy, can you give me a quick example of community of origin?
Yes, community of origin would be, say, because I use this slide for my undergraduate. So say I've got an undergrad from Argentina. So their community of origin is Argentina, and it still influences them even if they're on Emory's campus where they are in the US.
Okay.
So they're physically in the US and part of that context, but their community of origin, being Argentinian, is still going to have an influence over them.
Okay.
So that's, and again, so not all of these circles are part of everybody's life, but this is a way to sort of think about different contexts that you are part of. And again, I think this is to give you kind of the framework and the background, and then I'm going to move more into how the larger culture of a particular country influences work. I'm going to look at that more specifically today in terms of US and the kind of large cultural notions of work in the US. But I'll also show you how someone's specific religious group also influences them. So this is background to try and help you understand that. I teach a whole course on this, so this is giving you an overview in a way that I hope is understandable without getting into too many of the nitty-gritty details.
Yeah, this is great.
Great. So what I'm going to do now is move into this next section where I'm going to basically tell you some stories. So I want to help you understand more about these contexts and culture by telling you my career story. Because basically, until I started on a career path, I didn't realize how much conventions were influencing my life. I didn't realize how much of my life I was living because of conventional notions of things. So this is where I'm going to tell you some stories. And I'll move first to, this is me at 17 years old. And when I was in high school, deciding to go to college, I thought that I wanted to go into business with the eventual goal of being a CEO, right? This is what you think of when you're 17. You think of business and you think, oh, I'm going to, work my way up in some big corporation and eventually I'll run it, because I was quite ambitious at the time. So when I was graduating from high school and applying to college, I looked for a program that was what you were supposed to do if you wanted to go into business. And what you're supposed to do in the US is get a bachelor's degree in business administration. That's what I thought at the time. And I lived in California. And I'm going to actually take that down a minute so I can see you, and I'll put this back up again. But I lived in California, and my top choice was to go to UC Berkeley because they had a BBA program. And I thought, this is great. I'll go get a BBA. I will get an entry-level job in business after I graduate. I'll work my way up, and someday I'll run some big company. Well, the first thing that kind of threw me for a loop was my parents made me apply to Stanford. I didn't really want to go to Stanford. I thought it was a nerdy school, and they didn't have a BBA. So why would I want to go there, right? Well, I didn't think I would get in, but I did. And after I got in, I thought, oh, I don't know, maybe I should think about this a little bit. So I went to visit the school, and I liked it a lot. It was much smaller than Berkeley. It seemed to be warmer and friendlier and better. So I decided, well, I'll go to Stanford, and I will do what all people who want to do business at Stanford do, which is major in economics, right? This is what you do. So I majored in economics, and I'm still on this path here. I'm still kind of here on this path thinking I'm going to be the CEO. I major in economics, and by the time I got to junior year, I'd almost finished the economics major. I actually declared the major fall quarter, freshman year, and I just kept taking those classes. I didn't like the classes, but I did them anyway because that's what you're supposed to do. I actually liked all my other classes better, and I got better grades in all my other classes. But again, I want to go into business, which means I must major in econ, and so I did this major. Well, by the time I got to junior year, I was pretty much almost done with the major, and I decided I would do something interesting like study abroad. So I planned to do study abroad in winter quarter of junior year. Well, at the same time, over the first 2 years at Stanford, I had met another student, a young man, and my boyfriend, and we were quite serious. And he was 2 years older. He was also an econ major. He had just graduated and had gotten a job in consulting. Of course, this is what you do with an econ major. Graduating from Stanford, you get a job in consulting. And he worked in Palo Alto at this consulting place, and we still saw each other. And before I was going to go and study abroad, we started talking, and we'd gotten quite serious, and we started talking about getting married after I graduated, not after study abroad, but after I graduated. And he kind of casually starts talking about, oh, it's going to be so wonderful when you're Tracy Smith. His last name wasn't really Smith, but I'm disguising his identity here. But he starts talking about me being Tracy Smith and our little Smith kids. And I have to tell you, internally, I did this double take. And I went, what? And I didn't say this to him. Inside, in me, I thought, what is he talking about? I don't want to be Tracy Smith. I'm Tracy Scott. That's my identity. I don't know if I want any Smith kids. I haven't really thought about this. All of a sudden, I started I had this kind of epiphany that I'm not sure I want to do all of these things. I'm not sure I want to get married and have kids. I also don't want to change my name. And why? Why should I do that? Why doesn't he change his name? it just made me start really questioning things in a way I hadn't done before. So this was the beginning of a very long questioning time in my life. I started questioning things about him. I went on study abroad. As you can imagine, that relationship did not last. And after I come back from study abroad, my nice little career path I thought was going to happen changed, and I embarked on this one. And this is my actual career path, which looks nothing like the one I thought it was going to be. This threw me into doing study abroad, kind of changed my whole worldview about everything. I started recognizing conventions that were American that I was just doing because I'd grown up there and thought that's what you were supposed to do. It just made me start questioning all kinds of things in my life. So I'm not going to go through this whole path, don't worry. It's very long, and I've had many different stops and starts. What I will tell you is that I completely changed my mind after I got back from study abroad about this whole business thing. I went ahead and finished the econ major, but then I decided to do something unconventional. I didn't know if I wanted to do business. All I knew was that I wanted to do something in another culture. I loved study abroad, but I didn't feel like it was a real cultural experience when I was with 40 other American students in England. So what I decided, along with a friend, was to get a work permit, which was available at the time, and move back to London and just live and work there and experience another culture. I was fortunate, my parents were very supportive of this. I just decided to kind of take a gap year. And at the time, people didn't do gap years, but basically that's what I was doing. And I graduated, I worked over the summer, made some money, I got this work permit, and then my friend and I moved to London. No job, no place to live, we just did it. And that was probably one of the best things I've ever done. It helped me see really it helped me kind of think about who I was. It helped me kind of realize that social contexts are important. I was not a sociologist then. I didn't understand how any of this worked, but I was kind of seeing it without knowing what to call it, seeing that social conventions oftentimes are very implicit and they guide what we do without us even thinking about them. So it really started me on that path of questioning. And then I tried all sorts of different things. And the big turning point came when I came back to the States after having tried a bunch of different things. And I went to a really great career counselor at Stanford who made me sit down and think about what I valued. Not what, people were telling me to do, but what did I want to do? And she did that in a practical way where she made me think about what were the abilities that I had that I really enjoyed using and that I thought I was good at. And then what were my core values? How did kind of my abilities and skills fit in with the values that I had in terms of what I wanted my work to do? And that the exercises she had me do and the self-reflection she had me do made me realize that for me, I wanted work to have purpose. And that started me on the path to getting here to Soc and getting the PhD. But again, there were lots of other things along the way, which I'm going to stop now because the story is way too long. But I want you to kind of see how this helped me understand conventions, and it helped me question a lot of those conventions and start thinking about what was it that I wanted. What were my core values? What did I think work should be? So this is kind of to give you background about my dissertation in sociology. It was actually about work choice and work values. Because it was so important to me, I wanted to see how these things worked for other people. So now I'm going to move into this next section where I'm going to show you a bit about my research into this. that looks at how culture matters for work life. And to start with this, I want to again go back to this notion of social context and the culture of a big social context. And again, this is this is a kind of complex theoretical thing that I'm presenting to you in a very shorthand way, but lots of researchers and theorists have looked at the history of the United States and Western Europe after the Industrial Revolution, and they've shown how the whole meaning of work changed after the Industrial Revolution. The structure of work changed, and the meaning and culture around it changed as well. And what happened was work got separated from the home when you had all of these industrial factories, and men started going out and going to work outside the home, and women started to sort of stay in the home and basically take care of that realm. And the culture kind of went along with this structure here, and this notion that a lot of researchers have talked about called the ideology of separate spheres. Basically, what arose was this notion that there are two spheres of life, the work sphere and the home sphere. And the work sphere is public life. It's where you go out and you are with other people in the public sphere. And home life is private, where you're with your nuclear family. And the work sphere is the sphere for men, and the home sphere is the sphere for women. So men go out to work, and they're in public life, and women stay at home, and they take care of the home life and the family and the husband. And you can see here on this little graph what I've, there we go. What I've done is sort of show you these two spheres, the work public man and the home private woman, and then these little blue boxes that go along with them are the types of characteristics that have become known as masculine characteristics and feminine characteristics. So when all of this is happening, what also happens is that society and culture defines men as people who are active and independent and competitive, not emotional, and the financial providers of the family. Whereas women become defined as passive, connected. They're the relational people who kind of pull everyone together. They're cooperative. They're very emotional because they're in charge of that emotional home life. And again, they're domestic. That is their realm or their domain. And you can probably imagine that a lot of these characteristics have become stereotypes for men and women. And they oftentimes influence how we act, who we become. Men and women are socialized into these traits very often. And again, over time, this is shifted a bit. It's not nearly as split as it was in the 1900s, but we still have vestiges of these notions today. And this is where I want to show you a couple of different pieces of research that connect to this notion of the masculine and feminine characteristics. So the first two slides I'm going to show you are from a survey that I actually did in a class here at Emory about the undergraduates' work values. And again, what we talk about is that work values can be classified, many of them can be classified into feminine values and masculine values. So for example, the work value of wanting a job that pays well would be seen as a masculine value because it's that linked to that kind of financial provider notion. Whereas a value about work that you want it to be flexible and allow time for family is considered a feminine value because it's connected to that domestic sphere. So what we did with this survey was look at a lot of different work values, and I'm going to just show you a few, two that are considered masculine and two that are considered feminine, and I'm going to show you the gender differences in the students' responses. So what we're going to see here on this next slide is the masculine work values. So can you see that? Yeah. So here, the kind of two values on the survey that are considered most masculine is this notion that students want work that pays well or work that has a lot of prestige. So the question that was asked said, when you're thinking about your future work, how important is it to have work that pays well or work that has a lot of prestige? And what you see here is that men and women answered very similarly. And this is what we tend to find with the masculine type of work values, is that middle-class women have increasingly adopted these masculine work values, so that men and women are quite similar in terms of wanting good pay, wanting prestige, and those types of things. Where there are more differences are with these feminine work values. And so with this slide, I'm showing you two of the feminine work values. One is this notion that you want your work to allow you to help others. And the other one is that you want your work to allow you time for family. And as you see here, the differences in men and women are greater. So, you know, the top bar is the men and the bottom bar is the women. And I think what's particularly interesting here is the big differences in this notion of having work that allows you to help others. 62% of our Emory undergraduate women said that was very important to them. That is a lot of people, 62%, whereas 40% of men said that. That's still a good number, but it's a lot less than the women. Overall, when you add in important with very important, things get a little bit closer. So 80% of the men said it was either important or very important, 89% of the women. And again, when you look at the numbers for work that allows time for family, you see that 82% of the women said that was either important or very important, whereas 70% of the men said that. That's still a majority, but it's quite a bit less than the women. And these differences were statistically significant. So again, what this data are showing is that we don't know where this is coming from, but more than likely, the culture that we're raised in gives us these implicit notions and values about work that tag onto our gender. So that's one little piece of evidence. The next stuff I'm going to show you is from my dissertation, and I'm going to go through it quickly, so you're not going to get all the detail. But what I want you to see here is how another subcultural group can influence how people view their work. So in my dissertation, I actually looked at how religion and gender influence people's work lives. And I looked at a number of different groups. I'm going to show you what happened for one particular group that I looked at, and these were evangelical Christian women. So these were women that were very connected to their religious group, evangelical Christianity, and they were very much influenced by this religious notion that there are natural gender differences created by God. And I did, for my dissertation research, I did a survey, but I also did 50 in-depth interviews. So the quotes that you see up here in the little bubbles are from my interviewees. And many of these women talked about their religious beliefs being very important to them. That basically men and women are created differently, and they have different things to do in terms of work and family. So you see Renee here says this, that God creates Eve to be a helpmate. Men and women are different in their makeup, and that's why men and women do different things with the family. So they very strongly believe that men are the ones that prioritize work and women prioritize family. But these women were all highly educated. They had college educations, and they had all worked in the paid labor force before they had gotten married and before they had children. And what was interesting is in their work context, they'd had very meaningful experiences, which didn't kind of go with what they thought was going to happen from their religious beliefs. They'd gotten into work and they'd felt that their non-domestic abilities were really showcased and affirmed, and they actually liked their work. So they felt like it was fulfilling, that it showed they had these capabilities, that you can be successful. that people appreciated them for what they could do. And what happened was when they did stay home, when they had children, they missed work. So you hear Jean here in this one quote, this paid work, it was my own thing. So at work, people appreciate what you do. She says, I think that's it. Being a wife and mother, you never, very rarely, nobody appreciates you. So interestingly enough, they had this tension that they felt like their home work, their work as wives and mothers was most important, but they didn't get fulfillment from it in the way that their paid work gave them. So what was happening here was there were these two contexts that were kind of in conflict. Their religious group context is telling them one thing, their experience in their work context is kind of telling them something else. So what do? Well, what I found was that they started to develop their own ideology or their own meaning around their life decisions. They all talked about how when they had to make decisions between work and family, what they relied on was this notion of calling, this kind of God-ordained telling them or guiding them into what to do. So, this is what Christina here symbolizes, is they use this notion that God called them to do different things at different times. So they weren't just supposed to be mothers and wives, but they were also supposed to work in the workforce when they weren't doing that God could call them to both of those things. So this allowed them to fulfill their sort of religious theology notions at the same time fulfilling that experience they had at work that they really liked. So you hear this woman say, I think your calling is what you're supposed to be doing. When you're doing it, you feel at peace with yourself. I feel like being a mom to Rachel right now is my calling. I'm fully satisfied and fulfilled. But up until the end, my work was a calling. Yeah, when I was in lab, I felt I was very content and I was fulfilled. I didn't feel that I was missing something. So they all talked about how they thought you could have a lot of different callings at different times. And that was how they kind of, they brought together these two spheres or their two social contexts and how they imbued their work with meaning. So, this was a really, and that's kind of a summary of these, really interesting way to see how culture affected these women, the two different cultures, their work culture and their religious culture. So again, this is very brief, and I wrote a whole article about this, but I hope it gives you a little idea of how culture influenced this particular group. What I want to do now is sum up, because we're getting close to the time where I want to answer your questions. And basically, why am I telling you all of this? Why does it matter? Who cares if culture influences our work decisions? Well, the punchline, culture and these conventions can constrain you, whereas awareness of them will free you. And this is really kind of my punchline for a lot of my social classes, is that our choices are often constrained by the contexts that we're in because we don't see them. We go along with conventions, we go along with what you're supposed to do because everybody goes along with what you're supposed to do, and we don't think about it. But the more you're aware of the context that you're in, the more you can see past them to see whether you want to actually live up to those conventions or not. So awareness of these conventions allows us to make our own decisions. You may decide that you actually like the culture and the values that you're part of, and you want to live in light of those, but you may decide you don't like them and you want to do things differently. You can do things differently. So awareness allows us to make our own decisions and to choose work in ways that align with our own core values. And there's some research on this as well, which I won't go into at all, but a lot of people, there are lots of different values about work. There are lots of different ways to find meaning in work. And what some research has shown is that when people are aware of their contexts, And when they start to really think about their own values and their own beliefs, then they can make decisions about work that are more in line with who they want to be as people, rather than simply the culture and the cultural conventions that they're part of. So a lot of this is saying that we have the agency to find meaning or to make meaning in our work. And this is what some of this other research that I have up here is talking about, that it's possible for us to find purpose in work and to make choices about it when we realize we have the agency to do that. So I'm going to summarize and finish up here with some questions for you. I would challenge you to think about some of these things. Maybe you all have already thought about these things and this is nothing new to you. But if it is, then I would challenge you to start thinking about what are some of the conventions around work from your particular social groups or your social background, but also what are your core values? Because when people tend to find the most meaning at work, it's when that work aligns with their core values. So think about what's important to you about your work life. Do you want work that contributes to the world? Do you want work that you enjoy, a workplace that you enjoy, a good salary, a flexible schedule, whatever it is? Think about what's most important for you and think about, does your current job fulfill your values? Does your current job fulfill your purpose? And that's a lot of times we don't kind of think about that, but that's something that goes along with core values that's important to think about. So finally, I'm going to leave you with one practical tip, which and a challenge as well, is to take time alone to think about these things. Culture bombards us all the time. When we're in our social contexts, when we're reading things on the internet, when we're on social media, we're being influenced by this stuff all the time, even if we aren't seeing it or thinking about it. So I do this with my students. I challenge them to take some kind of time alone every day or every few days where you really unplug from everything, from all of your electronics, from all the people you know, from every outside voice. So this means you go on a walk, but you don't have your earbuds in. You don't listen to a podcast. You really need to be alone with your own thoughts so that you can reflect on this and think about, what do you want? How do social contexts influence you? What are your traditions? What are your beliefs? Think about what's most important to you. Choose your purpose in work. Decide how to make work meaningful for yourselves. No one can do this for you, and all of the tips and advice you hear from people is coming from their worldviews. So I challenge you to kind of step outside of that and try to figure this out from your own perspective. All right, so that's my talk for today, and I'm happy to answer questions. Yeah, there's
That's
a lot here.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Tracy. I know that's challenging to have a whole semester of work in about 40 minutes, but we appreciate the great summary. We've got some really great questions. The first one is looking forward to learning what are some red flags that we should look out for when you're trying to learn about a company's culture from the outside.
Oh, that's interesting. Organizational culture.
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard to know from the outside. I would say that the best thing you could do is if you can find someone from the organization that you could talk to candidly. I know that's not always easy to do. Otherwise, get on their website, look at everything you possibly can to see if you can see any red flags. Google the company. I Google everything, right? Do an search, look for any news item you possibly can about that company. If you did that with Uber, you would know Uber's a horrible place to work. There are ways that you can do that with internet searches. But otherwise, it's trying to find someone that's an insider who can help you know about that company. But that one, I'm actually having my students do that in the course I'm teaching next semester. So if they come up with tips, I will share them back with you all.
Thank you. I'd also like to add to that, for anyone who is listening in, if you are interested in a company or trying to learn more about the cultural environment of a company, the Emory Alumni Association is a great resource to reach out to alumni who may be working in that company. They're going to be an automatic insight for you. So please use us as your resource when you're looking to change jobs or looking for your first job. We're a great resource to find out what the culture is like from an Emory perspective as well.
That's a great
Got
one.
another one.
Yeah.
I like this one. How do you figure out what you're passionate about so that work doesn't feel like work?
And this is a good question. I always get the passion one. The recent research has shown that that again is a cultural construct. The notion that we're supposed to be passionate about work. Many people are not, and many people don't have a passion about anything. They have interests and they have things they enjoy. And I mention purpose because to me, what's more important for me is to have a purpose in my work, not to have a passion about it. To me, passion is about emotion and it comes and goes. So what happened when I decided what I wanted to do was I really thought I want my work to contribute positively to people's lives. That's my purpose. So I can find work that fulfills that, whether or not I'm always passionate about it. If I know the work is actually meaningful in that way, it helps motivate me. And I know other people, sometimes you can't find a workplace where the mission is actually explicitly contributing, but you can think about, how do I contribute to my coworkers' lives during work? How can I be a better coworker to my workers, to my coworkers? There are ways to make work meaningful that way. And that's what some of the research shows is some of this is you have to be engaged yourself and you have to be proactive and make choices to make work meaningful. But if you're in a toxic work environment, the best thing to do is try and find one that's not. And I know that's not always easy to do. But I would say look for interests, look for things that you enjoy, but don't put that pressure on yourself to have to find a passion about work. Many people are interested in many things, and you can enjoy a lot of things without feeling like it has to be this overriding passion. Again, that's a cultural construct of ours.
I'm really interested in that, in your response too. Where do you think that cultural construct came from? To where passion, is it a theme? Is it a trend? Where did that come from?
Somebody somewhere coined this term, and everybody has picked up on it. It is somehow the media has picked up on this term, and what happens again. This is I'd have to do my whole course about media and culture. But when you have people in the media who influence other people and have a lot of cultural power, they can dictate what is seen as the right thing. And what happened was somehow higher education picked up on this notion of culture, and you had passion. And you had a lot of people talking about passion, and somehow it has gotten seized on as this is the end all be all of everything. It kind of goes along with the notion of happiness in US and Western Europe, that the goal of life is to be happy. That's a worldview. That isn't some inherent thing. It isn't inherent that everybody everywhere in every culture wants to be happy. That's a cultural notion that Western societies really, it's a bedrock for them. And the passion thing is part of that. But again, some of this is, try to read some alternative religious books or philosophical works that challenge these notions. If that is what you believe, it's great. But there are ways to find meaning and joy that aren't the kind of stereotypical happiness passion stuff. It's just that's what tends to dominate the media.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's a great explanation. And this is a great segue to the next question. This is a big question, so I don't know how you're going to be able to answer it, but the question is, how does theology play into this secular work?
And that's a really good question, actually. That's what a lot of my dissertation looked at. It really depends on the people and the religious group. So some religious groups have a theology about work, where work is it's a realm of life that God is concerned about and involved with and guides you in. So and that's what my evangelical Christians were talking about, was that work is not separate from their faith life, but part of their faith life. So their faith and their religious beliefs, they took into their work lives, and they felt like it made them a different person at work. It undergirded their kind of ethical stance at work. It undergirded what they chose and how meaningful it was. So for certain religious groups, there is a theology actually kind of about work. Other groups don't have that. So it really depends on the particular religious group and their theology. Yeah, but a lot of the Protestantism itself has a lot about work and calling. That's a long tradition in Protestant Christian traditions, that God cares about people's actual secular work and wants them to work in ways that does contribute to someone's life and is positive, has a positive impact on the world. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. Our last question for the day is, could you speak a little bit to any research that you've done on female entrepreneurs?
On what? Sorry?
Female entrepreneurs.
I'm sorry, I thought you said email entrepreneurs. I'm like, I don't know what an email entrepreneur is. Female entrepreneurs.
Yep.
Yes, female entrepreneurs, well, have a much harder time than male entrepreneurs because of those stereotypes I showed you. And I haven't done research on this, but there's a lot of research that shows that women have a harder time getting financing for small businesses and entrepreneurial ventures, because people don't think women can do these sorts of things. Again, it goes back to those stereotypes that men are leaders and women are followers, and that women are maybe not going to be able to stick with something long enough or be powerful enough to lead a business. Now, we know that's not true, but those are the cultural constraints that lead to having a more difficult time finding funding. I do know, though, there are a lot of female-run companies and funding organizations that are trying to help correct that. It's trying to find them. Again, Google searches will help you with that. Actually, Sheryl Sandberg's group Lean In has, I think, resources about that kind of thing. But yeah, it's a really great question. And unfortunately, we are still stuck with these stereotypes about gender that have a big influence on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. This has been some really wonderful content and a great way to start off the academic year.
Great. Well, and anyone, it's really hard to get into all of this in 40 minutes. But if you have other questions, I'm always available on email, and Lane can connect you with me.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who joined us.
Thank you.
We did record this, so the recording will be going out later today, as well as a link to Dr. Scott's webpage at Emory, so you can get in touch with her if you have any follow-up questions. We'd love to hear from you. If there's other topics that you're interested in hearing from with the alumni office, we can connect you to faculty and to some professional experts to help you along the way. And with that, I will say happy Monday to everybody. And thank you for joining us, and have a great rest of your week.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank you.